Unisciti a noi, sorellina.
Director and co-writer Roberto D'Antona brings us Village of the Vampire, also known as Caleb, and this is a 2020 vampire movie. Now, this I suspect may have started life as a mini-series, and I say that because it's a very long movie. It is a 2 3/4 hour long movie, and it is a classic vampire story. It kind of reminds me of the glory days of the Full Moon Productions, think Subspecies and the Vampire Journals. It's that kind of aesthetic to it. The story here focuses on this female reporter who is looking for her sister who has gone missing some months before, and she gets a lead that this sister may have gone to this very, very remote village in the mountains, and I think they say it's on the border with another country, and it's not even on the map, this village, so not many people even know it exists. So this reporter goes there, and it's very weird. People are rather strange, and as the title suggests, there is vampires abound, led by this character called Caleb, who we learn is probably turned by Dracula. So he's kind of a disciple of Dracula. It doesn't specifically say that, but it's hinted at. Anyway, and she ends up making a couple of kind of allies, this other couple that are staying in this village, and a kind of jittery priest. And we find out that this Caleb is in fact like this kind of master vampire, and the village has many vampires in it, and humans also that serve the vampires. What will happen? You'll have to watch the movie and find out. So, what works in this movie's favour? Now, I will say I checked out some critiques from this movie, and I will address some of the critiques in what I think didn't work in this movie. I don't necessarily agree with some of the critiques, but what I will say that works is if you like classic old school vampire stories, then I do think there is a lot to enjoy here. But I'm going to put a caveat on this because it's going to depend on what version you watch. Put a pin in it. But I think it's a quite well presented, like, Gothic vampire story. If you like the Anne Rice style vampire, novels, if you like the Full Moon vampire movies, like the Subspecies, like Vampire Journals, and even if you like the Dracula story itself, it very much feels like that classic Gothic kind of literary style vampire story. It's very much presented as a somewhat romanticised version of vampires. I think the story, albeit not especially original, is quite compelling, I have to say. Even at its long runtime, I was quite compelled with this story. I think the look of this movie is, for a lower budget movie, and you can see the budget in the third act, which I'll come on to, but I have to say, some of the kind of the cinematography here I thought was wonderful. It's wonderfully atmospheric, this movie. I really liked, it's obviously shot in this kind of like medieval town or village somewhere in Italy, and I think it looks fantastic for a vampire sort of story. I think the costumes are, very much of your classic vampire stylings here. It's a little bit old-fashioned. I think maybe younger people, I can understand maybe they don't really want to watch this sort of stuff. But for those of you maybe of a certain age, I would suggest this is a slower moving, more thoughtful kind of vampire story, which is certainly, I would say, at least the first 2 acts of it really relies on some great visuals, some nice camera work, some fantastic lighting, and just a really kind of like Gothic sort of romanticized atmosphere. So I actually have to say, I think this movie looks great. I think the characters are interesting. I don't think they're necessarily all that original. I understand that critique, but yeah, I still found the characters interesting. Take for example our lead character, this Rebecca. She's kind of like a middle-aged woman looking for her younger sort of sister in her 20s, and she's sort of a little bit against type, I would suggest, of what you kind of normally see in these films. I kind of liked it, and she's kind of going there, and she's not like an action hero, but because she's like a reporter, all these kind of vampires suddenly start kind of getting a bit like, oh, we're going to get kind of found out here necessarily. So it kind of makes sense in context to the story, which I kind of quite liked. I quite liked our Caleb character. He kind of looks like Jon Snow if he was a vampire, I'm not going to lie. Or maybe even John Wick, but maybe he should have been called John, thinking about it. But anyway, it's a little cheesy. I'll come on to it, but I still kind of liked it. I kind of like the pomp and circumstance of this more flamboyant kind of production in some ways, and how it's like trying to capture that kind of literary stylings of maybe even the Hammer vampire movies to a certain degree, but I would go more in the Full Moon direction if we're being honest here. But I liked it, and I think it's got a large cast. There's kind of lots of kind of vampires, and then we're gonna get, if you want, it's a slow moving movie. It's much more about the unraveling of this tension, building up of the atmosphere. But the third act does offer lots of kind of Buffy the Vampire Slayer kind of style fight scenes and vampire slaying, when we get a group of vampire hunters that sort of turn up, and we get lots of kind of fights and stuff with that. So I thought that was all kind of quite good. I think the score is excellent. I think it's very much, again, it's classic kind of style of music that I think fits with this kind of aesthetic. So generally speaking, if you don't mind somewhat of a kind of an old-fashioned movie, you don't mind the runtime, and you're not going to complain about some of these critiques, which I'm somewhat going to defend in a little bit, then I think you can enjoy this movie. There are a few things that I would tweak about the story had it been me. Now, there is some major critiques. I'm going to come to it. But there's a couple of just minor things I'd pick up on first. I would have set this in maybe the 90s, the 1990s, because I think that with the advent of modern technology, the idea here that we have this village which is effectively not on any map, it's kind of cut off, no one even knows about it. There's people will have digital footprints. The idea here being that there's loads of people have gone missing around this area. And with digital technology and social media and stuff, I don't think you can get away with that so much nowadays. So I would have set this in the 90s, or around that late 90s. So it still is modernish, but you can kind of get away with not having to deal with the modern technology. They do sort of say, oh, you can't get phone reception here, but even so, I think you can probably, there's enough information on that you'd be able to kind of like work out where people work fairly kind of easily. So that's one tweak that I would have made. Or what I would have done is kind of have it like it's surrounded by some sort of mist or something that's that seems impenetrable, or some type of supernatural reason why it's kind of so cut off. I think just as it is, it's able to kind of, you had to pick it apart a little bit. Let me come on to the acting. So this is going to be one of the more controversial things. I did check out a few reviews to see what other people think, and there was a couple of common themes. One of them was the acting. Now, this is an Italian movie made initially in the Italian language, but the American release, both on DVD and on streaming, which is where I watched it, is dubbed, and the dubbing is not very good. So the performances, if you are judging it on the English dub, sound rubbish. You know, they sound cheesy. But I don't think that's necessarily fair to the film, because that isn't the way the film was made. So I don't really think you can say the film is bad or has bad acting unless you are really reviewing or commenting on the original language. So with that being said, I actually, after I watched this movie, and as I say, it's harder to track down in a Italian language, to be honest, but I found a copy. And I didn't watch the whole film again because it is nearly a 3-hour movie, but I watched some scenes to get an idea of the acting. And the acting still isn't brilliant, but I think it's better. So I will say, I don't think it's fair to really say the acting is bad if you're only talking about the English dub. It's not the original. That's not the way that film was made. I don't think it's a valid criticism. Yes, it's worth mentioning, but yeah, I think the film as it was made is in Italian language. I'll see if I can splice in maybe a scene here in the Italian language so you can get a flavour of the performances.
Sospetto. Questo spetta a me deciderlo.
Allora prego. Comincia pure.
Raccontami di te. Chi sei tu?
So the acting still is a little on the hokey side. There's no kind of getting around it, but it's a lot better in the original language. So that's kind of what I would say about that. The only thing I would say on top of that is I do think it's a little on the cheesy side. Again, this is maybe it feels like a product from the last century, almost like the 90s versions of the full moon movies. It feels a little bit over theatrical at sometimes. You know, we have our vampires hissing and, you know, rearing their capes and things like that. A little bit of kind of like hamminess with the kind of like the people who are playing vampires kind of giving it like, oh, you know, sort of style kind of performances. So it does come across as cheesy, and that's with or without the Italian. But that's more of the direction, I would say. It's not necessarily. It's the way the director has wanted these people to interact and their performances have this kind of like somewhat over theatrical style of acting to a certain degree. So let's talk about the length of the movie. Now, the movie is long. This is why I suspect it was actually a mini-series when it came out in Italy. One of my favourite films, Hearts and Armour, is a film in the US and the UK, but it actually was a mini-series in Italy. That was cut down admittedly, but I suspect this may have been a mini-series which has now been put out by you know, Western or English-speaking countries as a film. That is my speculation. I do not know that as a fact, but it just seems like that is the case because it is a long running time. And I have to say, I was still engaged despite the long running time, but I'd be remiss for saying there could have been cuts to make it a shorter movie. Let me give you an example. So we have a scene early on in the movie where our reporter Rebecca meets a contact who effectively tells her about the sister that's gone missing. And they meet in a restaurant. So the Rebecca character turns up and she asks like someone at the desk to say, "Oh, I'm meeting this guy. Is he here?" And I'm like, "No, there's no one here of that name." And then we have this whole big scene where, you know, oh, he checked with another one of his colleagues and, you know, oh, is this person here? And it's like, okay, we're wasting a few minutes here. You know, it's not a massively long scene, but you didn't need to have that. It offered no point in the story. You could have just gone, yeah, he's over there. You know what I mean? So there could have been changes to make this a shorter running time. The movie tries to have these artistic sort of flourishes, and I get why they're doing it, because we're meant to believe that the Rebecca character is having these kind of trances and visions and stuff, whilst the Caleb vampire is trying to sort of, you know, influence her and things like that, use his powers and stuff. And again, it comes across as a little pretentious at times that, you know let's call it what it is. And I guess it's like, oh, we want to have some artistic flourishes and stuff and have these cool shots. And some of them do look cool. But again, we didn't need this long sort of like all these kind of sequences. And then we have a super long flashback about the origin of Caleb. And I don't think we needed it at all, if I'm honest. I think we could have got everything from a couple of lines of dialogue or if not even mention it. So, you know, it seemed unnecessary. So I think this movie could have been shorter. I personally was still engaged in the story, but I do understand that criticism, so I still would have made it shorter, at least by, you know, maybe 40 minutes, keep it around the 2-hour mark. You can still have like a longish film, but you know, I get the critique that I've seen other people make, so you know, I can't not address that. Then we have to talk about the end of the movie, which is the sort of the climax. This is where it changes from a slow burn, atmospheric sort of neo-romanticism to Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and it was a little jarring. I wish they could have found a way to keep the tone of the first 2 acts in the third act, have some conflicts and stuff. But it just, we get this team of vampire hunters turn up, and one of them is this like Chinese woman with a sword. And we've got kung fu fights and everything with it. I don't know. I would have preferred a creepy look, you know, walking through the cemetery and this kind of this theatre that this vampire owns, this stage and stuff. That kind of thing with people maybe like a few scares and creepy music. Instead we get lots of kung fu fights and fist fights with vampires and stuff, which I don't think really fits the first part of the movie, the first 2/3. You know, I guess they wanted to have a little bit more action, a little bit more kind of excitement, but that's where you'll start to see the budget as well, because some of their kind of stunt work isn't particularly strong. The choreography isn't particularly strong. We get a little bit of cheaper effects in the kind of like the blood and things like this, and even some of the vampires' fangs, like they're like a different colour to the rest of their teeth and things like that. So you see the budget certainly more, I would say, in that third act. I still think it has an element of entertainment value. I was still interested in the story, but yeah, it kind of comes across as a little hokey. I won't lie. So I kind of disagree with, like I say, I don't think you can judge this movie with its air quote poor acting purely based on the dub, the English dub. I think it's worth saying if you're watching it with the English dub, you be prepared. But that's just the English dub. It's not the way this movie was made. So with everything being said, how to rank this one? So I'm going to give it a 6 out of 10. I still kind of liked it. I'm not going to lie. And I'm not judging this by the English dub, I should point out. So this is like, I'm taking that away out of my ratings. It's not fair for me to rate that film with a crappy dub. It's worth mentioning, but it's not how that film was made, so I'm not judging it for it. 6 out of 10. Anyway, I look forward to hearing your thoughts if you've seen this one. Do leave me a comment and I look forward to seeing you next time.